Shout out to G-Man Boxing. Where's the piss bottle? It's over there.
Alright people, review of the week time. Boy do we got a lot to talk about in this one. So a lot of fights happened the weekend, quite a few actually. There was fights on Friday, there was fights last night as well. But I think the thing I really want to start with in this video is I want to talk about the situation with Dillian Whyte's lawyer. I believe his name was Jeffrey Banks or something like that, or Jeffrey Benz or something. Yeah, Benz I think it was, not Banks. And Frank Warren. They had a conversation on TalkSport. I think it was on Thursday. And a lot of people were very much critical of Dillian Whyte's lawyer. I've seen a lot of people say that this guy pretty much has ruined Dillian Whyte's chances in this fight. He's got Dillian Whyte to sign a contract that he's not comfy with. You know, Frank Warren really took this guy to school in certain things. And, you know, at the time, I didn't listen to this until Saturday. I had another listen to it again today. A lot of things that Warren was saying, like for example, he was saying, why would you get your client to sign a contract that he's not happy with? And that, if you're listening to that, right, people could essentially listen and say, oh Jesus, you know, he must be a terrible lawyer. I mean, getting someone to sign a contract he's not happy with and saying just sign it anyway, I mean, he must be terrible. You're neglecting the fact, right, that this was a deadline. They had a deadline to sign this. Well, let's go back to the start, right? I believe they had a month, Dillian Whyte and Tyson Fury, to negotiate the fight would be. Dillian Whyte, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe the amount he wanted was 10 million. Might have been higher than that, but it was around 10 million, which was the figure they wanted. And bear in mind, Dillian Whyte's career high payday career high payday in general was, I think, 4 million. Was that it was 4 million. It might have been the Povetkin fight, but it was in around at the first Povetkin fight, or maybe the second one. But I think he only declared so much, so that was his highest payday. So he wanted more than that. I think there was other things as well that they were looking for as well. Now, Team Fury, Team Whyte couldn't get to an arrangement, so then it went to purse bids. It was won by Frank Warren. Now the WBC have, I think when it goes to purse bids, there's a name on, I can't think of the name. Oh, that's going to annoy me now. But there's a name the WBC have, which is kind of like, it's like a fight agreement kind of thing as well. It kind of tends to come about more so when you see purse bids. The WBC, because by the way, when you're an interim champion, it's not like being mandatory. All right, it's kind of like there's a normal mandatory challenger, and then it's kind of like being super mandatory, if that makes sense. You tend to get treated a bit more fairly. If a champion vacates, you don't have to fight the next available contender. You just get elevated, and I believe the purse split is a little bit more in your favour because you're an interim champion. And I believe the purse split for the interim champion going into this fight would have been 40 to 45%. For Dillian Whyte, which is quite good actually for a mandatory. I think the IBF only gives the mandatory 20%, which is very good in terms of 40-45. But this went down to 20%, which of course Team Whyte weren't happy with. Now I believe the WBC had their own discretion to kind of set it as it is. Dillian Whyte obviously has not been in the WBC and Sullivan's good books, certainly for the last year and a half anyway, maybe even longer than that, who knows. But he certainly hasn't done himself any favours with the WBC with regards to speaking out openly against them. The arbitration hearing, which was the arbitration, but I know he took him to court in 2020. That might still be going through the system, I don't know. But he's not been exactly the easiest to work with regards to WBC, so they weren't going to do him any favours. There was also a situation where Team Whyte, it was in something, embargo or something like that, basically because they were worried about being paid from Frank Warren. And look, a tree is known by its fruits. I can actually understand that, because I've known fighters who have fought on Frank Warren shows before, several years ago now, but they fought on Frank Warren shows before, and they wouldn't have been getting anywhere near, they wouldn't even be getting a fraction of what Dillian Whyte's getting. You're talking 20, 30 grand. Some of the fighters I've heard from who've been opponents on Frank Warren shows, not your average knockover job, but opponents anyway, you'd be lucky to probably get that. And that they've waited for them checks to come through. Allegedly, they've not been exactly they've got them after a lot of work, if you know what I mean. That's only for an amount like that. You're talking, what, 8 million? I'd be worried, considering how Queensbury have been over the last few years. You know, you can check that on Company's House. Frank Warren's reputation, you know, with payments and stuff like that, you would be a bit worried. At the end of the day, Team Whyte were backed into a corner. They obviously were trying to hold out from signing this contract when it was there, because they were given obviously a deadline. They were obviously trying to hold out and just hope that, okay, these need us, that they're going to give us what we want, because they knew they wanted to take this fight. Of course Dylan Whyte wanted this fight. He wants his world title shot. He's been chasing it for the last God knows how many years, and it would look pretty silly to go through all this just to say at the very last minute, you're alright, keep it, I don't want it. They were always going to sign it, and I think Team Warren and Team Fury knew that, so they were like, we're not going to say anything, we're not going to do anything. At the last minute, the last hour, they eventually had to sign it. Otherwise, because Frank Warren's saying, you got your fighter to sign something they didn't agree on. Well, of course, because if Dylan Whyte didn't sign it, and obviously he's not happy with it, if he didn't sign it, then he'd be gone. You know, the WBC would not do him any favours. They would take him straight out of the rankings. He would have to go elsewhere. And Team Fury would have been happy to move on and fight Joe Joyce or someone like that. In fact, they definitely would have fought someone like Joe Joyce. In-house, all-British clash. Frank Warren knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing in that interview. He knew what he was doing in that conversation. And, you know, other things. Like people saying Dylan Whyte's only got like 5 tickets, whereas Tyson Fury's got a couple of thousand. And Dylan Whyte with his 5 tickets, that's obviously for his entourage, friends, family, etc. 5 tickets, I mean, I'm sure that someone like, you know, Ray Moyle, who fought Dalton Smith, got more tickets for Matchroom, you know, last night than Dylan Whyte would have got for that. Absolutely crazy when you think about it in that regard. So for me, this whole Dylan Whyte situation with Tyson Fury, I think Frank Warren did his best to come out on top without really going into the finite details, if that makes sense. You know, so he would just say, like, so Dylan Whyte's lawyer would say something, he'd be like, oh, so you're not happy with that, so he signed something that, you know, you're not happy with, kind of almost a case of, oh, why did you advise him to sign it? Well, they had no real choice at the end. And also Frank Warren was talking about things like Dylan Whyte's contractually obliged to promote the fight, and as his lawyer said, well, within a reasonable amount. So what exactly do you inter that to mean? Do you inter that to mean that he has to be posted on Twitter, on Instagram every other day? Or would you interpret that to mean that he just has to show up at the press conference and there you go, he's fulfilled his obligation? You know, so there was a lot of things going on in there. You know, I still believe this fight will go ahead. In fact, I'm putting my neck out. I'm putting my neck out and I'm saying that this fight is going ahead. If I'm wrong, so be it. But I'm putting my neck out and saying this fight's going ahead. There's a lot of things going on. And I think that in one sense, I thought that Dylan Whyte being quiet could benefit him in a sense of that he's not going to be able to bite on any of Tyson Fury's mind games. But at the same time, the way Frank Warren and Team Fury are being, I wonder if that's going to affect Dylan Whyte in training, the way they're being so harsh, you know, giving him very little tickets, you know, saying, oh, well, you need to promote this or else, and this, that, and the other, and saying, well, you signed a contract for a fight you're not happy with. I wonder if that's going to get to Dylan Whyte in some way. And maybe when he gets there on fight week and then on fight night, the red mist will descend a little bit. And he doesn't need that. I don't think he needs that in this Tyson Fury fight. So it's been an interesting one. It was an interesting listen. 2 guys going back and forth. And, you know, there was a Jim White and some other guy. I forget the other guy's name. I got the impression they were kind of falling on Warren's. They were kind of falling on Warren's side a bit. And look, I was listening to it from a neutral point of view, but I was thinking, like, I see what Warren's doing, and he's talking about this contract and saying, well, you're not your opponent to sign. You got your fighter to sign a contract he's not happy with. But it's like, well, he's no real choice in the end. It was either sign it or no fight, and you're not going to get a fight anytime soon for said title, because WBC probably will say, well, you had your chance, you didn't take it. You know, tough, you know what. So it was an interesting one. It was very interesting. In terms of the boxing, we'll talk about boxing. We'll talk about the fights that went on last night, because there was a lot of fights that happened last night. And there was also a card on Friday, which was a Pro Bellum card. We might actually start with that. The Pro Bellum card on Friday. had a great British title fight. It was a very fun, entertaining fight between Troy Williamson and Mason Cartwright. Cartwright, I hope I said his name right, actually. I think I said Cartwright. But it was a fantastic fight. Very poor scoring from Terry O'Connor. It's becoming laughable now. Now, the right man, in my opinion, won the fight. Troy Williamson. I actually watched it again this morning, and he won the fight. He had a scare in the second round. He won the fight. But a 117, 111 scorecard, 112 actually I should say, that's shocking. That's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, where the hell did he get that scorecard from? Troy Williamson even acknowledged it, and he said, look, I felt I won the fight. I felt I won it by a round or two. I think he said 2 rounds. But 117, 112, even he was acknowledging the fact that that scorecard was absolute BS. And it happens to come from a Terry O'Connor again. At the end of the day, to have these judges, and the usual suspects in terms of these British judges, and not to say this was an away fighter from a different country, obviously not, but the British Boxing Board of Control have their judges. And when you have people like Ian John Lewis, when you have people like Terry O'Connor with bizarre scorecards that are so out there, you can't just say it's subjective, because that to me is something worse than that. When you have a fight that's clearly competitive, that's clearly close, and one judge the fight's kind of like that, and one judge just scores it like that. It's like, how the hell did you wind up like that? In terms of the fight itself, it was a very good fight. You obviously had Lewis Ritson boxing Zlatichinin, hope I'm saying his name right, completely just dominated him over the course of 10 rounds. He's never really been the same since that Mikey Garcia knockout all them years ago. That was several years ago now, actually. I think that was like 2017. That was on the undercard of Frampton Santa Cruz too, actually. I remember that. And he was never really, that was a bad knockout as well. He was really dominated by Mikey in that fight. Mikey really just took him out in 3 rounds, really just didn't put a foot wrong. So he's never really been the same post that. I think he got knocked out by some journeyman actually a fight or two after. So Lewis Ritson is still, he's with Pro Bellum now. He is, I think he's still trying to get over the matchroom days, especially that Ponce. Was it Ponce? The guy who knocked him out in 10 rounds and beat the crap out of him. Was it him? I think maybe there's still like elements of that fight still lingering in his head. But in terms of the matchroom card that we had on, obviously the fights that I kept an eye on were obviously Maxie Hughes versus Ryan Welch. Absolute shutout for Maxie Hughes, looking better and better each time. We'll see where this journey goes with him. You know, he's boxing full time now. I mean, for a record of 24-5, he's so much better than that record suggests, and it really does show that a lot of these fighters who turn over, and he only recently over the last few years got a backing from MTK, and then obviously signed with Eddie Hearn. When some of these fighters like Maxie Hughes, who are good fighters, who can improve, if they don't have that backing when they turn over, a lot of these guys take L's that they really shouldn't against guys that, if they had a full training camp, if they had the full backing, if they had the full support, probably could have beaten. You know, in my opinion, Maxie Hughes right now, let's have a look at his losses. I'd pick him over Liam Walsh. I would pick him over Sam Bowers right now. I'd pick him over Martin J. Ward. That is Martin J. Ward, isn't it? Yeah, it is Martin J. Ward. It just said Martin Ward. I expected to say J. Ward. I'd pick him over him as well. These are guys, he's lost to him twice actually. Scott Cardle, I wouldn't like to see Scott Cardle back in the boxing ring anytime soon. He's not fought in a few years, and the last time he did fight, he sounded absolutely punch drunk as hell, so we'll ignore that. But those are guys you'd pick Maxie Hughes over now, and it shows the level of improvement, but also shows when you have backing and you have, you know, a team behind you and you can focus your attention on this full time, and you've not taken too much damage, of course, how far you can actually go. So Dalton Smith obviously got a win. He beat Ray Moylette in 10 rounds. The only thing I have about this fight is I'm surprised Smith didn't get rid of him sooner, if I'm honest. When I seen how Moylette looked in that first round, his timing looked all off. Didn't seem to have any head movement. Just was hoping and praying that the high guard would do the job. It didn't. Offensively was very poor. Was looking to set up a right hand. And again, his timing was completely off with all them shots. So for me, Dalton Smith, although he did the job and he was able to get Moylette out of there, I felt that if he really did step on the gas and go through the gears, he could have ended that fight in about 4 or 5 rounds, because Moylette was there for the taking. The problem with Ray Moylette is there are several issues there. One is he's not got a particularly good defense. He relies too much on the high guard and not moving his head. That's just not good enough. He struggles with people who have speed. Let me tell you a fight he fought. He fought a fight in 2017 against this guy. No, it wasn't this one actually. It was at this one. It was it was in 2017. It was a guy called Donette Bryan. Now that you can watch that fight on YouTube. It was on a Ken Casey show. I think it was on a Lou DiBella show as well. And Shelley Vincent fought on that show. She's a female fighter, and we'll go into it. But she's a female fighter. She wasn't too shabby. She's 42 now, but she wasn't too shabby a fighter. But Ray Mollett fought on that show, and he won a split decision. He was down early. I think he was down in the first or second round. And if you actually go and watch that fight, he lost that fight. And the reason he lost it was because he couldn't cope with the speed of Donnie Bryant. Now, this is a guy whose record is 1-7. So this is not someone who, is, what would you say, a Darnell Boot type of guy who's better than his record suggests. Now, this is a pretty basic fighter, and for my money, he beat Ray Mollett. Ray Mollett did rally in the last round, in the 6th round, to be fair and hurt him, but still, the damage was already done, and he couldn't handle the speed. Now, he's been out of the ring essentially since December 2018. He had one fight in 2021, about this time last year, and it was 1 minute and 5 seconds against the guy who was 1-4. And every one of those losses was a stoppage loss called Adam Wallace. So again, it's not an accurate. You may as well have just not done anything at all in reality. So obviously his time was going to be off. Obviously his reflex were going to be off. Obviously he was not going to be as sharp as he would have been if he'd have come in there as the Mollett in start 2019. It was never going to happen. So with that, I would have thought Dalton Smith would have got the job done sooner. Mollett was game. There was a lot of low blows that went in. They weren't intentional from Dalton Smith, from what I could see anyway. He wasn't throwing them deliberately like an Andrew Galata. But to come the 10th round, Mollett had taken a beating. He went down twice, and his corner rightfully threw in the towel. Mollett was protesting the stoppage, but to be honest with you, that sums up to me why certain fighters need a corner to pull them out when they've had enough. And that was the perfect time. That was absolutely spot on. If Mollett had Joe Gallagher in the ring, he would have got knocked spark out in that 10th round, because Gallagher would not have thrown that towel in. His trainer, Packy Collins, had the wherewithal to say, you had enough, you're not going to win the fight, you're well behind on points, throwing in the towel. I don't care if you're unhappy, I don't care if you say you're okay, you're not okay, you're out of this fight. Right thing to do, in my opinion. Some people said it was premature. I don't. I think that was exactly the right stoppage. I think that was a compassionate stoppage, and it shows why you need a corner to look after your fighter, because that Ray Mollett would have kept going, and he would have kept taking shots because he's got a lot of heart. That's all well and good, but it's not good for your health. You need a corner to be able to pull you in. As I said, if that was Joe Gallagher, he would have been like, geez, you're fine, you're not talking with a slur, so you're fine, you can keep going, keep getting your head knocked about. Yeah, that's Joe Gallagher in a nutshell. In terms of the main event, Kiko Martinez, Josh Warrington, I've already talked about that. Warrington offensively, very good. Really showing no signs. Few jitters here and there, but other than that, really was offensively was quite good. He looked much better upon further reflection than I thought he did. Than I thought he would, I should say. I did think there'd be some little jitters still there, and there was a few. There's a few little jitters early on, maybe not in terms of being hurt, but in terms of just Mauricio Lara. In terms of him, he's probably not going to get the Josh Warrington fight anytime soon. I reckon it's going to be Lee Wood, Josh Warrington next. I believe he's got a mandatory. I believe Josh Warrington has a mandatory for the IBF as well, which he'll need to take care of. But we move on with that. In terms of other fights, Lee Selby was out in Argentina last night. I did get a chance to watch that fight. I didn't watch it live. I watched it this morning. And the guy's name, Gustav Daniel Lemos. I knew they were just calling him Daniel Lemos. He stopped Lee Selby. First guy to ever stop Lee Selby in 5 rounds. Lee Selby is 35 years old. I actually thought he was younger than that. I really did think he was younger than that. He's been out of the ring. And here's the thing. IBF do this, and I don't understand why they do it. I really don't. It baffles me. Lee Selby was in this. Now, this was a final eliminator for a shot at George Kambosos. Lee Selby's not had a fight since he lost to George Kambosos October 2020. So coming off the back of a loss, which was a final eliminator, how in hell do you end up in another final eliminator? The IBF are known for doing this, and I think it's stupid. I really do. if one fighter is fighting in a final eliminator and he loses, and I thought he lost pretty soundly to Kambosos realistically. I mean, he had moments there, but I thought he was fairly comprehensively beat by George Kambosos. If you've lost like that, surely you should go back down to the back of the queue. Or at the very least, if you string together a couple of wins, good wins, then yeah, into an eliminator, no problem. But the fact that you lost, you didn't fight at all last year, and now you're in a final eliminator? How does that work? They've done that before, the IBF, with champions, like literally Kid Galahad, happened to him. You know, there was other occasions as well. I just find it very strange. And to me, it's just kind of like, what's the point in having a mandatory if the guy loses and you're going to put him straight back in, sometimes against someone who's overmatched for another title? Why don't you just order a rematch? If you're literally saying, this guy, I want him to fight for the title again, but we'll order an eliminator against, you know, Jimmy Cranky over there, and he's mandatory again. I don't understand. Just make him like. And here's the thing, right? They'll do that for someone like, and this is not me having to go with Selby, I'm having to go with the IBF. They'll do that for Lee Selby, where come off the back of a loss straight into an eliminator. But for Hrgovic, when they cannot get a fight for him, instead of just making a mandatory, it's like, right, down the list. Ah, Zilly Zhang, there you go. I just, the logic, I don't know. Anyway, in terms of this fight, Selby came out as he always does in the back foot boxing in the first round, and you know, had a little bit of success. But this Daniel Lamos guy, very ferocious. I seen a couple of clips of him prior to this fight, and he looked like someone who was happy to pressure you. He seemed an out and out pressure fighter, really did. But defensively poor, and some of the shots he was throwing were big swinging shots, and I kind of thought to myself, Selby might be able to get around some of these shots if he's not got too much power anyway, or if Selby's not regressed massively, he might be able to get around some of these shots and he might be able to do some work. Not a chance. Selby was just ragdolled in this fight. He was pushed back. He couldn't fight on the back foot, and I don't mean in the sense if he lost the ability. I mean, Lamos just wasn't letting him fight in the back foot with the pressure, and he was able to put Lee Selby down once in the fourth round and twice in the fifth. Lee Selby is a good fighter, but I always felt he got a little bit too much praise. I always felt that people took him a little bit. They thought he was better than he was. That's not to say he's not a bad fighter. You know, I remember some of Lee Selby's early fights, and he did it the hard way. He did it on small hall shows. He lost actually in one of his early fights on a 4-rounder to a guy called Samir Mamini. That was actually on the undercard. I remember that was on a Friday. That was on a Frank Maloney card. It was on a Friday fight night. Chris Edwards was defending his was it the British? It was the British IBF flyweight title. He defended it actually. I remember that was on Sky Sports. He defended that over. Oh, what's the guy's name? Is it Uzi Ahmed? The guy who done the Prince Nassim knockoff. The guy who got knocked out in a round. That was the fight where he walked to the ring. Now that fight went 12 rounds, but that was the fight where he was like literally filmed walking to the ring like Prince Nassim, because they actually slapped those two. So when he got knocked out, I know I'm going a bit off topic, but just hear me out. When he got knocked out by Ashley Sexton in that one round with that really cheesy entrance, that actually was the entrance for the Chris Edwards fight, and then they showed the Ashley Sexton knockout after. So that was actually the card Lee Selby took his first loss on. A little bit of boxing trivia for you there. But he did it the hard way. He fought his way up. British, Commonwealth, European. He never had the style that a promoter really would have wanted. I know he's promoted by Eddie Hearn for a while, but his style was never really one that a promoter would be like, oh yeah, I want that. And he's not an outgoing, charismatic person. So there's nothing wrong with that. But for a promoter, they're just like, well, we'll put you on the undercard. He'll always be in a kind of undercard fight. You're never going to be the main. And even when he was the main, it was the Josh Warrington show. And I remember Boxing Gossip back in the days. Shout out to him. Obviously he doesn't make videos anymore, but he was a great channel back in the day. He thought that fight. I remember I love watching Boxing Gossip, but I disagree with him a lot. I disagree with him, but it was always respectful. But I disagree with a lot of things he would say. He was always very dismissive of Josh Warrington, and I was like, no, Josh Warrington's going to beat Lee Selby. He's going to beat Lee Selby. Because I just thought Lee Selby, there was holes in his game that you could exploit, and you needed the right fighter to do it. And Josh Warrington was the one who did it, and he never really looked the same after that. Like Omar Douglas didn't look right there. Beat Ricky Burns, yeah, but a few moments. and obviously back-to-back losses. So I would imagine that's the end of Lee Selby. In terms of other fights, Miguel Burchell took an L last night. He was soundly beaten from pillar to post over the course of 6 rounds. At one stage, I really did think at 130, Miguel Burchell was the only person who I could conceivably think could beat Lomachenko. That knockout defeat to Valdez, that took a lot out of him. Just the nature, it was a savage knockout. I reckon that's taken a lot as well out of Miguel Burchell, which was sad to see because I really liked Miguel Burchell. He was fun to watch, he was entertaining, he was a big puncher, but he seems fairly finished now. Let's talk about some of the news. I know Tim Tszyu fought last night, but I haven't seen it yet, so I'm not going to talk on it because I just haven't seen it. Alexander Usyk has reportedly now left his home country. He's confirmed that he is taking this Anthony Joshua rematch, so it looks like it's going to go ahead in June. So he's setting up training camp. Usyk versus AJ, seems all systems are go, all systems are tick with that. It's just a case of waiting for a venue, waiting for an announcement, and we see how it goes. Josh Kelly will make his long-awaited return to the ring at the O2 Indigo in London. I might actually go to this card because I think it's on a Friday night, and why not? It'd be a bit of fun. The Indigo is actually a nice little spot. It's a smaller room in the O2. It's actually a nice little spot. Linus Udofo. Jamie will correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it's Linus Udofo. It is that. Jamie from Punch Perfect Boxing, shout out to him. Good mates with him, good mates with Linus, and he's fighting Denzel Bentley for the British middleweight title with Harlem Eubank versus Sean Dodd on the undercard. I really like that fight, Linus versus Denzel Bentley. One of my worst predictions I've ever had in this channel was Denzel Bentley versus Felix Cash. I was really impressed with how Denzel Bentley looked in the Mark Heffron rematch, and I just thought Bentley has too much for Felix Cash. He's got too much variety, too much speed, too much power. But boy was I wrong. And he's not looked the same since then. And I reckon Linus will take this. He's looking as a much improved fighter as Linus. Last few fights I've seen him. And this could be on Channel 5 as well, terrestrial TV. So I reckon that that's his time to shine. I really do. He's been looking very good lately. So I reckon that that's his time to shine. Other news, Andy Ruiz teased the potential pay-per-view with Luis Ortiz. Luis Ortiz versus Andy Ruiz pay-per-view. I'm not surprised, to be honest with you, because that really is the fight. And I think, did he say it's on Fox? Does it have Fox? No, it doesn't have Fox. But I would imagine it would be on Fox pay-per-view. Doesn't surprise me at all. That seems logically the next move for Andy Ruiz and for Luis Ortiz. It's one last payday before he heads off to the retirement home. Because, it's a win for Andy Ruiz. I mean, this was the prime Luis Ortiz. He beats Andy Ruiz, maybe even stops him. But this Ortiz now, he is looking slow, no punch resistance, and just a shell of himself. Not the same Luis Ortiz I remember beating Brian Jennings and knocking out Tony Thompson all them years ago. It wasn't that long ago, but it seems it's eternity away now. In terms of other news, Ben Shalom said Kell Brook versus Chris Eubank Jr. said July could potentially happen in July. Also, Amir Khan could have a comeback fight against an unknown opponent, could be anybody, and then face Kell Brook. Interesting. So Amir Khan may be looking to get back with a win, dust off some of the cobwebs, and maybe use that as leverage for a Kell Brook rematch, just to say, well, the inactivity got me. If I hadn't been so inactive, I would have been better. I've knocked over this guy who was probably not very good in reality, but I'm looking better now. Let's have the rematch, and then maybe try and sell it like that. Because if they just go in and sell it as normal, if they just did Kell Brook Khan 2 next, it wouldn't do anywhere near the same numbers. If they were able to sell Mutton Dressed as Lamb for Amir Khan to have a comeback fight where he looked quite good, he saw a bit of speed, you might get more fan interest. You might, because they might turn around and say, oh, well, he was inactive for so long. Of course he wasn't going to look as good. So watch the space there. Eddie Hearn has revealed that Demetrius Andre's contract is set to expire after the Zach Parker fight. He does not expect that he does not expect it to be renewed, as they can't get in big fights, and that explains why he's put the Buatsi Richards fight on the same night. I really don't like it when they do that. I really just do not like it when promoters do that, when they clash the big cards together, because you're having to go back and forth between one. You want to watch one, you want to watch the other. I really don't like it. Jaime Munguia versus Danny Jacobs is reportedly in talks now. that would potentially be at super middleweight. So is Jaime Munguia struggling at 160? I seen a video of him fainting after a weigh-in. I think it was for his last fight. So potentially that could be the case actually. Oh wow, I didn't even realise this. Wait till you hear this, lads. This is the first I've seen of this. Good lord. I didn't even realise this. I'm only reading this now. Deontay Wilder's brother, Marcellus Wilder, returned to the ring after a 2-year layoff. Remember, he lost his last fight, and guess what? Lost again. Beaten by a journeyman, Eric Abraham, 7-13, who lost his last 9 fights. Marcellus is now 5-3 as a pro. Jesus Christ. That boy is an idiot. There's no word. That's the only word I can use to describe him. If you hear some Wilder, Deontay talks a lot of BS, but Marcellus talks even worse. Even worse. This is a guy who confronted Tony Bellew. And look, I've not got much time for Tony Bellew as a person, but as a fighter, tremendous fighter. Could you imagine what he would have done to him? Bellew would have knocked that kid out. As I say, he's older than me. Would have knocked him out without even trying. And obviously he was living on Deontay's name. I seen a couple of highlights of his first few pro fights and he looked horrendous. And this is a kid who can't get past journeyman. And is making these journeymen. Did it say how he lost actually? How did he lose? He lost. Doesn't say. I would imagine they would have said it if it was established. They would have said it. But that is absolutely crazy. Crazy. Now, some breaking news today, which I will end on this. Well, actually, I'll end on this. George Kambosos versus Devin Haney. Now, reportedly, a done deal for Undisputed. Mark the date, lads. June 5th in Australia. It's claimed Haney has signed a multi-fight co-promotional deal with Bob Arum, Top Rank, and Lou DiBella. So, Haney has obviously done a runner from Eddie Hearn, because Eddie Hearn was only talking about Devin Haney during the week. And now it looks like he's going to sign with Top Rank. That kind of surprised me a bit. Obviously, it's co-promotion, but still, you know, he's very close with Mayweather. And obviously, I would have thought Mayweather maybe would have said, oh, me and Bob, we don't. But ayo, and Lou DiBella. Kambosos versus Haney. And I believe I seen something as well. Yeah, it's here. This is Devin Haney's new co-promotional deal with Bob Arum for the Kambosos fight. Includes a rematch clause. So if Haney beats Kambosos, Kambosos can have a rematch. So if he beats Kambosos again and decides to stay at lightweight, because Haney's a big lightweight, so he's touch and go if he's coming up or down. But if he shoots stay at lightweight as Undisputed, Lomachenko next. Damn. I like this fight. I would definitely be favouring Devin Haney, but I see this fight as a more winnable fight for Kambosos. Certainly the fact it's in Australia as well, and he will have his home fans cheering him on. There might even be some Greeks who are there as well, but he will have the home field advantage. He will have that stadium cheering every single punch he even glances on Devin Haney. And Devin Haney will be travelling away from home. Now, he has fought in Mexico, I believe, before. I think that's the only other country. Maybe he would have fought in Puerto Rico, somewhere like that. Someone wants to correct me. But he will be travelling away from home. Hostile territory, Australia is. And that's going to be interesting. Very, very, very interesting to see how he handles it, really. You know, he's been fighting in Vegas for the most part in his career. So seeing him go over to Australia and see how they do it there, as essentially the away fighter almost, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting. Lads and lads, I'm going to leave that for you there. Thank you for the great weekend, by the way. We're little under 120 subs off 7k. I'd love to be able to do it in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Be flipping amazing. Surely we can do that. Share this video if you have to. Leave a like, please. It does help me out. It helps the channel get seen by more people. If you could, smash the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'll leave you with that, lads. Peace.